Namaste friends. In this video, first I will give some expectations on the Afghanistan crisis, how it will pan out for various countries and also an outlook for Afghanistan, the impact on India, Pakistan, China, etc. and US, etc. And after giving my expectations, then I will go through the astrological factors that enable some of those expectations so that those who are not interested in astrology can skip that portion. So I will first share some outlook for Afghanistan, the impact on India, impact on US, impact on Pakistan and China, and impact on Iran and Middle East. First, outlook for Afghanistan. Unfortunately, as I mentioned on Facebook a few months back when some friends asked me what I think of the future of Afghanistan, I don't have any good news for my Afghani friends. Unfortunately, the next couple of decades look pretty bad for them with lot of war, either internally or with external forces, civil wars, lot of strife, lot of fighting, lot of violence. I don't see any respite till 2041, unfortunately, for Afghanistan. But the good news is, after 2041, I see a period of about 50 years which will bring stability, prosperity, and progress to Pakistan, and also some democracy, some progressive democracy is possible in Afghanistan. But unfortunately, it can come only after 2041. So, in the short term, there will be lot of troubles for Afghanistan. There will be lot of changes, and as early as later this year and early next year, there can be a civil war kind of situation. There can be resistance developing to Taliban, and there can be fights between Taliban and that resistance. So I don't really expect stability in Afghanistan, unfortunately. Particularly this decade will be very problematic. So the the strife will continue for them. And some people ask me, will there be any impact on India? Of course, there will be impact on India because Taliban movement was incubated by Pakistan's ISI, Inter Services Agency, their intelligence agency. So, and still, even now, Pakistan Taliban leaders have strong relations with Pakistan. So, Pakistan's ISI. So, this will have an impact on India. But fortunately, when I look at the charts of India astrologically, I don't really see India facing major troubles. I do see a couple of years later, in the election year, late in the second half of 2023 and the first half of 2024, before the 2024 national elections, I do see the possibility of some warlike situation and some uh, fight with a neighboring country, Pakistan, or possibly some indirect Afghan Taliban fighters supporting Pakistan with some tacit support of China through the Pakistan occupied Kashmir frontier is possible. So that the time period I see for that is 2023 2024 before the elections, trying to destabilize India. But I do expect that India will have international support, and also India will be able to fend off the attack very capably. So I'm not too worried for India, but India will have to be very careful, very cautious, and the build up the army and have contingency plans if there is an attack from Pakistan, or if there is an attack from Pakistan occupied Kashmir. And as for impact on US, oh, by the way, as for the impact on domestic politics of India, whether this will affect the BJP party that is ruling India right now, I don't really anticipate that this will have a problem. If anything, the just pragmatically speaking, politically speaking, anti-Muslim card or security card will actually benefit BJP. So I do expect that this will strengthen the hand of Narendra Modi at the national level as well as Yogi Adityanath in UP. This will strengthen them. So in the coming UP assembly elections next year, this may actually be beneficial to the BJP party, to Yogi Adityanath and Narendra Modi. Now, what is the impact on USA? Before we talk about the impact on USA, I just want to circle back to something I said last year in my interview with Infinity Foundation, where I gave some predictions for the world over the next several years. And one thing I said, and actually this is something I said a decade and a half back also, I just repeated in that interview. What I predicted is that US will go through what UK went through in 1940s and 1950s in 2020s and 2030s. In other words, UK was the unquestioned number one in the world, and then in 1940s and 1950s, some of the missteps they made and also some situations that developed made UK, it was still a strong country, but it was not number one country anymore. It was basically a second rung power. So US will go through that kind of transformation over this decade and the next decade, first half of the next decade. So that is what I expect, and this is what happened in Afghanistan is one of the contributing factors. So after spending 20 years there, US very abruptly pulled out the forces from Afghanistan. So this will make the world question the leadership capability of US. So this is this is not the only thing, but this is one of the factors that contributes to what I mentioned in the past. And now let us talk about how we got here. Is it really just Biden's fault, or is this a fault that needs to be shared by various presidents? First of all, George Bush is to fault because after he went into Afghanistan to fight the Al Qaeda, see, the war was originally against the terrorist organization called Al Qaeda, not against Taliban. Taliban is not really a terrorist organization. They are a violent political movement. If they implement Sharia law and if they stone people to death, etc., that can't be digested by the world. But it's not really. It's questionable whether you can call it terrorism. Whereas Al Qaeda was bombing bombing civilians outside of the country as well as inside the country. So Al Qaeda is a proper terrorist organization. So US went into Afghanistan to fight Al Qaeda, but after that they also almost eradicated Taliban. Either Taliban fighters went back to their homes, or the leaders were killed, and some leaders escaped Afghanistan and went to Middle Eastern countries. First Pakistan and then Middle Eastern countries. But the thing is, really, after Osama bin Laden escaped through the Tora Bora caves into Pakistan, US troops should have come back from Afghanistan. So to start this nation building mission in a country that is not really suitable for that, at a time that was not really suitable for that, was really not a wise thing to do. So George Bush is to fault for starting this long nation building mission. And the futility of the mission must be clear by now, because US spent so much money in Afghanistan, but there was no result in the end. And now after that, when Barack Obama came, he got Osama bin Laden. At least after that, in his second term, he should have got the troops back. So he is to fault for continuing the nation building mission in Afghanistan. And then when Donald Trump came, his heart was in the right place. He wanted to get out of all these countries because his calculation was, we are not making any money there, so let's get out. They are not paying us. But the thing is, whatever his motivation was, the conclusion he came to, which is you should get out of these countries, was the right conclusion. But the execution was terrible. He negotiated with the Taliban to make a deal, to have a deal between US, Taliban and the Afghan government, so that the Afghan government and Taliban can share power after US leaves. And he's such a terrible negotiator. He always claims that he's a great negotiator, but he's a terrible negotiator. As you can see, the way he dealt with Iran, China, everybody basically. So he said, after talking to the Afghan leader, Taliban leaders, he said, oh, I love the mullah, mullah loves me, we are going to have a great, beautiful, wonderful deal. So he basically, after that, he lost all leverage. And Taliban did not give in, and he was under pressure to make some kind of deal. So he made a one-sided deal. US agreed to leave. This deal was actually signed on February 29, 2020. US agreed to leave, completely withdraw all the troops from Afghanistan by May 1st, 2021. And Trump actually started that process. In his term, during that year, the troops came down from 15,000 plus to 2,000 plus, the US troops in Afghanistan. So US could have struck a better deal, so where there were some guarantees that Taliban had to ensure. So US made a really bad deal, and also US overestimated the Afghan government. It was basically just some cronies of US who are Western educated and talk smoothly and impress the US leadership, but they don't have any grassroots support. They don't understand the country, understand countrymen, understand the tribal relations and tribal dynamics. So they were really, and also they were very corrupt. So all the corruption at the national level as well as at the provincial level turned off the people, and Taliban, which was in hibernation, they struck. They know that Afghanistan works based on loyalties, tribal loyalties. They struck all the right deals with tribal leaders, and they became so strong that once US left, they could completely storm the country. US leadership uh, wrongly assumed that the Afghan leadership will be able to fend off for a while, and that was a really stupid assumption. And finally, Biden is to fault because he his conclusion that he should go ahead with what Trump agreed to, the deal that Trump made, was a right conclusion, because even if US spends another 20 years in Afghanistan, it will probably not. The ending will be the same. In the end, it will not be any better. But the problem is and he also bought some time. Instead of sticking to the May 1 deadline, he pushed it out by a few months. So that was good. But in my judgment, one thing Biden got wrong. It may be his generals who advised him incorrectly, but he pulled out the air bases. Afghanistan, Taliban does not have any air force. So as long as US Air Force is present, Taliban cannot advance through all the provinces so quickly and take over all the capitals. So US should have evacuated all the citizens and all the help people, Afghans who helped them, and then basically pulled out the air force. But unfortunately, US pulled out the air force first, and that was really dumb. It may be because generals miscalculated, or Afghan army gave wrong assurances that they can fend off Taliban for a certain amount of time, for a few months. Whatever the reason is, that was Biden's fault. But one thing is, based on Biden's chart, the current period is really terrible for him. In the 2020 private chart, there are good yogas. That's why he became president during this period. But right now, a bad dasha is running, and especially just recently, Ketu dasha started running in the chart of career, and that's a really bad period. So next month or so, he will receive a lot of flack. He will be blamed for this, and it will be really bad for him. He will look really bad till probably mid-September. But after that, things will be slightly better. Things will start to improve. His image will start to improve a little bit, and particularly after November, after his birthday, his image will be much better. So in the long run, he will not be seen as somebody who messed up, but in the short term, this will be seen as a terrible mess up by Biden. And in terms of the long term impact, I expect that US will have lot of instability in terms of its foreign policy. So, for example, they got out of Afghanistan because they thought that there's no strategic interest of US there. But it does not mean Biden will be peace loving like Trump. See, Trump talks tough, but he doesn't like actual war, actual physical war. So in his term, we did not really get into any wars. As a matter of fact, we started getting out of the Afghanistan war. But Biden is not like that. He got out of this war, but he may get into some more war, another war somewhere else. So what exactly US wants, whether it will be active in the world or whether it will be passive, it will be very unclear. There will be mixed messages from US over the next 3-4 years. It will be really confusing for the world, and as a result, world will lose its patience and confidence with US. So slowly, the decay of US as the unquestioned number one in the world, it has started, and it will basically continue over the next few years. And and also, by the way, during at the same time, China will become more aggressive in the world. China will have some financial troubles over the next couple of years, and that, to cover that and to stop the unrest within the country because of the financial troubles, China will become very aggressive in the world in the next few years, next 2-3 years, and US will be confused on how to deal with it. So on a case by case basis, US will decide how to proceed, and US policy will seem very inconsistent to the world. And as far as China is concerned, there will be some financial troubles and there will be some military aggression for China about the next few years. But towards the end of this decade, in the 2029 time frame, there can be some civil unrest that will blow up into some kind of rebellion in China, and that can start to weaken the grip of the Communist Party on China, and that can result in a major war in the 2030 time period. But let us talk about the direct impact of Afghanistan. So if you look in the short term, Pakistan and China are big winners because, like I said earlier, Pakistan's ISI has so much clout in the Taliban leadership. So they will this will be seen as a win for them in the short term. And China has influence on Pakistan, so indirectly they will have influence on Afghanistan, and they will use it to establish a control over the natural minerals, all these rare earth elements, etc., that Afghanistan has. So China will have financial relationship and also some building some infrastructure kind of relationship. It can also give some loans. So it will build relationship with Afghanistan. So it will seem as a win in the short term, but it will be very short-lived because in the coming years there will be a civil war developing in Afghanistan, and there will be some anti-Taliban forces fighting against Taliban, and Taliban will have to flee, and some Taliban fighters will get into Pakistan, and they will create instability in Pakistan. And at the time when Pakistan leadership wants to become more progressive and improve the financial situation, they will bring religious fanaticism to Pakistan, and that will become problematic for the Pakistan army and Pakistan government. So there will be some tension between ISI, army, as well as the government. So it will create some instability in Pakistan. And one thing I expect is in the 2023-2024 period, there can be some small war that Pakistan will be engaged in. But towards the end of the decade, there may be more problems, and Pakistan may be isolated in the world and may face a lot of instability. And as far as China is concerned, the Xinjiang province in the southwest of China neighbors Afghanistan, and it has a Uyghur Muslim majority. So and China has been suppressing the Uyghur Muslims. So these Taliban fighters may help Uyghur Muslims, and that may become a nuisance to China towards the middle of this decade and towards the end of this decade. And that can really, towards mid 2020s and late 2020s, that can make the Afghanistan-China relationship very sour. So this will, in the short term, this will be good for Pakistan and China, but in the long term, this will be very bad. And Iran is also a Muslim country, and in the short term, there can be good relations with Iran and Afghanistan. But Afghanistan is ruled by Taliban, which is a Sunni force, Sunni power, whereas Iran is a Shia power. So those tensions, the tension between Sunnis and Shias will come to the surface. And also again, as there is simmering tension within Afghanistan, some forces will spill into neighboring countries, and Iran will also be impacted by it, and Iran will not appreciate it. Iran will fight. And also the other thing is there is this ISIS tension. There are some Sunni forces on the west side of Iran. So the Taliban forces may develop collaboration with them in a few years, and that can make Iran more unhappy. So there can be some tensions, and basically the strongest powers in the Islamic world in the Middle East are Iran, the Shia power, and Saudi Arabia, the Sunni power. But Saudi Arabia doesn't have a lot of military strength, so they can use ISIS as a proxy as well as Taliban as a proxy. So between ISIS and Taliban and Iran, there can be some confrontations, and those confrontations can blow as time progresses in this decade, and towards the end of this decade, that can develop into a major full-blown war. So this may be okay, neither positive nor negative, just neutral development for Iran in the short term, but in the long term, this is going to destabilize that area, the Iran, Afghanistan area, that whole area, and that can create the seeds for the upcoming world war, major war. And the other thing is some of the refugees from all this civil war in Afghanistan will first may go into Iran, may also go into other neighboring countries, and eventually into Europe. So there can be some instability in Europe also as a result of this. Overall, my expectation is this is a landmark event. What is happening? Afghanistan has seen instability over a long period, but this particular time, that coming decade, may be at a different level. So my expectation is this will destabilize that whole region, Central Asia region, and later Middle East region, and also the Southern Europe region, and that can have serious impact, and that can be one of the major contributing factors to the major war that is going to come soon. Pandemic was one factor, and this can be another factor, and other things will happen over the coming decade. Things will slowly develop, but this will be a contributing factor. And one tidbit on Afghanistan is the name Afghan is actually related to Sanskrita. In Sanskrita, Ashwa means horse, and that is actually in the Avestan language, which is the language of the scripture of Avesta of the Zoroastrian religion, which was popular in Afghanistan, Iran region in the old days. The word Ashwa became Aspa, and also it became Assa in the Prakrit language. So that word, from that word comes Ashwaka, Ashwaka or Ashwakan, which means horse rider. So Ashwakan or Aspakan became Afghan. Actually, Greek literature also mentions, I think, Asakanios or something. It mentions something that is derived from these Ashvikans. It talks about tribes that resisted Alexander the Great as he marched towards India on the northwestern side of India. So the Afghan word is supposed to be linked to the Ashwakan word, which means horsemen. So they were in this tough terrain, they were horse riding tribes that were making a living, and those were known as Ashwakans, and that became Afghans in the modern. One more thing is the city of Kandahar, which is in the southern Afghanistan, was known as Gandhar in the old days at the time of Mahabharata, 5000 years back. So Gandhari, the mother of Kauravas, Duryodhana and others, she is from Gandhar Desha, the country of the state of Gandhara, which is basically around Kandahar, the modern day Kandahar. So Shakuni, who was actually the major force behind the Mahabharata war, he's the one who misguided Duryodhana, etc. He actually wanted to take revenge on his own sister's sons, so he misguided them and got them into this major war against Pandavas and Sri Krishna, and they were destroyed, and he was happy about it at the end. His revenge was completed when the Mahabharata war finished. So Shakuni is from this region. So Afghanistan has a strong influence on Indian history from the time of Mahabharata. So hopefully, again, as I predicted, next 2 decades will be unstable, but I do strongly believe that from 2041 till 2091 there will be a period of stability, prosperity, and progress for Afghanistan. I hope that is true, and those suffering people will get some respite, even though it is in the long term. So on that note, I end my predictions, and some of these predictions, the rationale behind them, I will go through it now. And those who are not interested in astrology can skip now. Now we will look at some astrological factors, astrological analysis that was behind some of the conclusions I shared in the initial portion. First, let us use a long-term mundane chart for Afghanistan. Saturn-Jupiter conjunctions which occur every 20 years are important to see how things will be during that 20 year. But if you want to see a longer term thing, I use this chart. This chart is one thing is when Saturn and Jupiter conjoin, their consecutive conjunctions between them, Rahu Ketu move by one sign. So when Ketu is in Pisces and Rahu is in Virgo, that particular Saturn Jupiter conjunction chart is very important. I taught this 4 years back in an interview with Saptarshis Astrology, and I took the examples of Egyptian Empire, Greek Empire, Roman Empire, Inca Empire, British Empire, etc., and showed the rise and fall of various empires using this long-term mundane chart. And actually it was this chart using which I predicted a few years back that the period from mid-2019 till mid-2036 will be a very problematic period for the world with lot of catastrophes. So anyways, let us make that chart for Kabul, and this chart was made on September 10, 1921 at this time. And you can do this, you can make this chart by entering a date closer to that, and then conjunction chart and swearing in chart. The period is 298 years, because if you see when that occurs again, Saturn Jupiter conjunction with Ketu in Pisces and Rahu in Virgo, that is 298 years later. So the dasa that is most applicable in this chart is for Rashi chart is Shatrimsa Samadasa. And let's quickly go through a few things in the Shatrimsa Samadasa. Sun Dasa was a very important dasa for Afghanistan. In Sun Mars period, 1928-1929, there was a major civil war. And you can see that Sun is the Badhaka Lord in a fiery sign, and he's in 12th house in terms of bhavas. So Badhaka Lord in the 12th house is actually good for removing trouble. But the thing is, if you look at Mars, he's the 2nd and 7th Lord, a Marka in a fiery sign, in Badhakasthana, in Gandanta, because he's a 2-degree Leo. He's in the first Navamsa of Leo. So Mars is a clear Marka. So Sun Mars is a really problematic period. But within this dasa, because this is a dasa that shows relief, there was relief. After this civil war, there was some political assassinations and there was some instability in the country. But finally, in 1933, a 19-year-old king rose to power, and he ruled capably for around 40 years. And Sun, being the 11th lord of gains, he can show the gain of a powerful leader. And also, if you look at the Dasamsa, which shows leader, Sun is the 11th lord of gains, exalted and aspecting Lagna. So that can show a powerful leader rising to power and taking care of the country. But the Antardasa, let us look at it. It is Saturn Antardasa, and Saturn is Yokarka. So Saturn Antardasa brought stability to the country. And the next period was Jupiter. And if you look at the Jupiter period, he's okay. He's the 3rd and 6th lord, a functional malefic, but he is in the 12th house. So that's kind of like Viparita Raj Yoga. So he gives a lot of troubles, but also overcoming those troubles. And particularly Mars Antardasa, again Mars Antardasa, see, was a very problematic Antardasa. This was a period when there was another civil war. Some of the northern tribes had a major revolt, which took many years to suppress. So that was during 1944 to 1947. And again, a few years later, there was stability. And in 1950s and 1960s, the king brought some democratic reforms. And Jupiter being an idealistic planet, and also if you look at Navamsa, he's in the 5th house of Purvapunya, even though he's the 3rd and 6th lord. So it can show against some opposition, bringing some ideals as a result of Purvapunya. So this was an okay dasa, mixed dasa, but Mars dasa was a terrible dasa. As we saw earlier, the Mars Antardasa in Sun dasa and Jupiter dasa brought wars, and now Mars Mahadasa itself. So this was a period of civil war, Soviet war, again civil wars, and clashes with Pakistan, and also rise of the Taliban. All that happened during this period. And then Mercury, if you look at Mercury, even though he's 9th and 12th lord, he acts more like the 12th lord, because 12th house is stronger. And if you also look at the other divisional charts, in the Rudramsa chart of wars, he is the 8th lord. In the Trimsamsa chart of internal strife and civil wars, etc., he is the 8th lord of troubles. And in the Dasamsa chart of okay, here he is not bad. In the Navamsa chart of Purvapunya and also relations with other countries, though he is the 9th and 12th lord, he is in a fiery sign with Mars, afflicted by Mars. And also if you look at the longitude, he is in Gandanta, 1 degree Aries. And also if you look at the longitude of Lagna, it is 25 degrees. So he's actually in the 6th house in terms of houses. So he's in the 6th house in a fiery sign in Gandanta. So he can bring wars, etc. So Mercury period can bring wars with other countries. And also Mercury being the 12th lord in Rashi chart, it can show imprisonment, losses and imprisonment. And imprisonment for a country means Bandhana for a country means being occupied by other powers. So either being occupied directly by another country or somehow being under the control of other countries is possible in the Mercury period. And if we look at the Antardashas, right now Rahu Antardasha is running. And this is not really a good Antardasha. In the Navamsa, Rahu is in the 12th house of losses and also hidden enemies affecting you. And in the Rasi chart, from the Dasha Lord, Rahu is the 6th Lord of enmities and wars, and he's in the 2nd house, a Markasthana. And from Lagna, he's in the first house. So Rahu in first house. So this is not a really desirable period. But one good news is, if you look at the next Dasha, from 2041 onwards, a 50-year period is Shani Mahadasha. Though Saturn is in the 12th house, he is a Yogarka, 4th and 5th Lord. And he is taking part in Rajyogas there, especially Mercury Saturn give a Rajyoga. So, oh, by the way, even in the Mercury period, if you look at Mercury Mahadasha, Saturn and the Dasha between 2005 to 2012 brought some stability. During this period, Taliban completely retreated either to Qatar or Pakistan, or small fighters went back to their hometowns, and the big leaders went to either Pakistan or Qatar or other Arab countries. So Taliban movement basically became weak, and there was some stable governance during the Saturn period. And like we saw earlier in the previous dashas also, Saturn periods were good. So I'm hopeful that, and it is my expectation that in the Saturn Mahadasha from 2041 to 2091, finally there will be some stability, prosperity and progress for Afghanistan. And also Saturn being the planet of masses, there can be some democracy. There can be some real progressive democracy in Afghanistan during that period. But unfortunately, the bad news is they have to wait another couple of decades. The next couple of decades will be very problematic. And for that, let us look at another chart. Let us focus on these 20 years. So instead of 2021, let me change it to 1921. Let me change it to 2021 and just make the Saturn-Jupiter conjunction chart. And of course, Ketu and Rahu will not be here anymore, but that's fine. We just look at just like we have the lunar New Year chart where Sun and Moon are conjoined with Sun in a particular sign. You see the whole year, but Sun-Moon conjunction chart every year where Sun may be in a different sign. You use it for that particular month. Similarly, within that 300-year chart, you have these 20-year phases. So we can focus on the 20-year phase using this chart. And the dashas will be compressed for 20 years because the next occurrence will be in 2040. So if we look at this chart, the best dasha here is Dvadashotri dasha. Lagna is in Venus Navamsa, and Ketu is strong. He is the controlling planet for Dvadashotri dasha. So he is strong. So Dvadashotri dasha will apply in the Rasi chart. Where is it? Yeah, here. So Dvadashotri dasha of Rasi chart. If we see that dasha, right now Jupiter period is running, and in the Rasi chart, Jupiter is the 5th lord of Purvapunja and 8th lord of upheavals, and he is in the 6th house of disturbance and wars, enmity, etc. So Jupiter is the 5th lord who is debilitated. See, 6th lord being debilitated is good, but 5th lord's debility is not that great. And also 6th house placement is not good for Jupiter. So this is a problematic period. And to get better idea, we can look at the divisional charts also. In the Navamsa chart, Jupiter is the 6th lord in the 6th house, shows wars with other countries. Wars and fights with other countries. And if you look at the D30 chart, actually let's look at Rudramsa. In the Rudramsa also, he is the 8th lord. With the 8th lord Jupiter, 7th lord Saturn are together in the 7th house, 2nd house. That's a clear Marka combination. So this is a terrible dasha. And if you look at the Trimsamsa chart of internal strife and civil wars, etc. Oh gosh, here also 3rd lord Jupiter and 2nd lord Saturn are together in the 2nd house. That is a Marka combination. So this period is really terrible for them. And particularly Jupiter Saturn period will be towards the end of this year. So there is a chance that things will not be smooth for Taliban. There will be civil war. There may be resistance to Taliban within Afghanistan. So then the next couple of years, next year does not look good for them. And even if you look at the Ketu Dasha, Ketu is in the Trimshamsa chart is the Badaka Lord in the fourth house of peace, so that is not a good period. And Mercury is the sixth Lord in the Trimshamsa chart. Again, he shows a lot of internal strife. And Rahu is Marka in the Trimshamsa chart. So overall, several of these periods look really problematic for Afghanistan. So the next decade is not really a good period for them. This is a very problematic period for them. And if you want to look at the impact on other countries, how things will be for other countries, let us look at first. Let's look at. Oops, let's not change the date. Let's change it to India, New Delhi. Let's make the same Saturn Jupiter conjunction chart, same date. And now Lagna is not okay. The Navamsa has changed, even though the Rashi chart is the same. Navamsa chart is different. What is the best dasha for India? Let us see. I don't believe last one. Panchotri applies, but Venus is not strong. Okay, so the best is Vimshotri Dasha, but Ketu is the strongest planet in a Kendra. So we'll use the Tara Dasha variation of Vimshotri Dasha from Ketu. So if we look at this chart, we see that right now Rahu period is running for India, and Rahu is in the 10th house, which is not good for government. It shows some problems and instability for the government, but we can look at Dasamsa to be more confident. Unlike in the chart of Afghanistan, here Rahu is the 10th lord in the 10th house. Even though there are afflictions, he is the 10th lord in 10th house. So it is actually not too bad for India. And particularly Rahu Jupiter may have been bad. Particularly Rahu Jupiter may have been bad, but Rahu Saturn can be good. So overall, it's not that bad. As a matter of fact, looking at the Dasamsa, Rahu Dasha can show strong governance, strong and pragmatic governance, and then the Jupiter period will come, and this is a problematic period. If we look at the Jupiter period, he is the 5th and 8th lord in debility in the 6th. Oh, actually he's not in the 6th. Oh, sorry. That was in the Afghanistan chart, because the Lagna longitude changed here. Jupiter is in the 5th house, so he's in debility, but he's the 5th lord in the 5th house. Not bad at all. So Jupiter's period is actually pretty good for India. Let us look at Navamsa again. In the Navamsa chart, Jupiter is the Lagna lord in the 5th house, showing some sense of peace. So it's not bad at all. And if you look at the Rudramsa chart, okay, here Jupiter is the 3rd and 6th lord. So 6th lord in the 12th house can show either open or hidden wars with enemies. So this is a period when there can be some wars or warlike situations for India. And especially looking at the lunar new year chart for India for 2023, I believe that the year before elections in India, 2024 May is when the elections are. So the year before that, there can be some war or some serious tensions with a neighboring country, either Pakistan or Afghanistan. So India should be careful for that period. But in general, things don't seem too bad for India. And the fact that Navamsa Jupiter is strong shows that even if there is a war, India will have international support in that war. And if you look at the Saturn period, this is Saturn is the 6th and 7th lord in the 5th house. Not really a great period. But still, Saturn being in own sign, 6th and 7th lord being in own sign is not bad. And also in the Dasamsa, Saturn is the Yokarka. So it shows strong leadership during this period. Let's see the Dasamsa. So he is the 10th and 9th lord, and he's in the 12th house. It can also show in the 12th house, it can show some change in the leadership. So this is why I was expecting earlier that in 2026, of course Jupiter is also 8th lord in the 12th. He can also give it, but in these periods there will be a change of guard in India. But overall, this is a good period. And Mercury is the 5th lord in the 10th house, so he shows excellent leadership for India. So As far as governance is concerned, India will be pretty good during this period. And in the Navamsa chart, Mercury is the seventh lord in the seventh house, giving a Rajoga with the ninth lord Sun. So, based on the long-term chart, I expect India also to be involved to some extent in a war that happens in 2030, 2035 time period. And but the thing is, based on this chart, I expect that India will forge strong alliances, and India will get a lot of respect from the other countries. So a lot of international cooperation and India's international stature will increase. So this is not really very problematic for India. So overall, I expect that in the election year before election, there can be some misadventures from some neighbors, but India can fend it off, and India will have international support. And if you look at the chart of China, Beijing, China, oops, not Chile, China, and again we have to make the Saturn Jupiter conjunction chart. If you look at this chart, you can see that Lagna is in the first degree of Libra, and this is a chart. And if you see, okay, Mars is the second and seventh lord, the Maraka, in a fiery sign in deep Gandanta, 0 degree 12 minutes area. So extremely deep Gandanta. So Mars is really problematic. When there's a strong Maraka like this in a chart, it shows serious problems for the country. And Rahu in the 8th, actually no, he's not in the 8th based on longitude, so never mind. Now, in the Navamsa chart of relations with other countries, how foreign policy will be, you can see that the 6th lord Jupiter is in the 6th house with Saturn and Ketu, two malefics. So there can be a lot of wars, and also 2nd and 7th lord Mars is in here also he's in Gandanta, 1 degree 48 minutes Aries. So Mars is really problematic both in Rasi and Navamsa. And let's look at the Dasamsa chart of leadership. Okay, this is okay. Let us look at the Trimsamsa chart of strife in the country. And here we see that the 10th lord of leadership, governance, Sun, he is debilitated in the 12th house, and 8th lord Mercury afflicts him. So that is pretty problematic. And if you look at the longitudes, they are actually pretty close. Mercury at 8 degrees and Sun at 10 degrees, so pretty close. So this is not positive. It shows basically some uprising against the government during that period. And also 7th lord Venus is in the 8th house. That is a Marka combination. And Rahu Ketu are in the 6th house. That is also not good. So there are enough bad combinations here. So in this 20-year period, there is a good chance that China will face some serious rebellion from within, and also a lot of wars and warlike situations and aggressive postures with the other countries. Let's look at the dashas. I don't believe any conditional dasha is applicable. Actually, Ashtotri is applicable, but Mars is pretty weak. He's in deep Gandanta, so it doesn't work. So the best dasha is the Vimshotri, and in terms of the Tara dasha applies because there are strong planets in Kendras. And in terms of Mars, he's the strongest planet in a Kendra. For Tara dasha, we ignore even if a planet is close to at the fag end or fag beginning of a sign. As long as we pay more attention to the longitude of the Lagna, so we ignore that. So we use Vimshotri dasha from Mars. Tara dasha from Mars as the seed. So a variation of Vimshotri known as Tara dasha with Mars as the seed. So looking at this period, this dasha, we see that Ketu dasha will run. Ketu dasha is running right now, and Ketu is in the Navamsa chart. Ketu is in the 6th house, so it will be aggressive. Will take an aggressive posture. And if you look at the Hora chart, Ketu is the 8th lord. So some financial problems are possible during the current period. and Venus period will run next, and Venus is second and seventh lord Marka. So 2022 onwards, this period can bring some financial problems. And if you look at the Rudramsa chart, there's nothing special in Rudramsa chart, but if you look at the Navamsa chart, again there's nothing special. So Venus period there will be some financial troubles, and then the Sun period will come, and nothing really particularly stands out here, but one period that really stands out is Mars period. Mars, because he's the Marka in Rasi chart, Marka in a fairy sign in deep Gandanta, in Markasthana, in both Rasi and Navamsa. This is a period when China's international standing can take a big beating, as well as overall physically there can be some problems to the nation of China. And if you look at the Trimsamsa chart, again Mars is the Lagna Lord in Lagna, and you may think that that is a positive, but really, one second. Yeah, if you look at the longitudes, Lagna is at 23 degrees, Mars is really in the 12th house. So Lagna Lord in the 12th house, who's in one sign, so that also shows some instability in the country. So overall, I expect that based on the long-term chart, long-term Mondayan chart, I expected that between 2019 June till 2036 June, there is a problematic period. And during that period, I saw the same signatures I saw when the Egyptian Empire, Greek Empire, Roman Empire, Inca Empire, and British Empire fell. So this is the period when I expect China to disintegrate, some civil unrest to start and become a major rebellion, and for China to not be able to contain it and split. And the seeds are the main developments regarding that may happen in this period, 2027 December till 2029 February. So basically 2028 period. And let us look at the US chart. Oops, here, District of Columbia. Saturn Jupiter conjunction chart. Okay, here also, if you look at this chart, here Lagna is actually, okay, Lagna is Aries. Now, compared to Mars, Saturn at 7.5 degrees is closer to the cusp of a house, and he's also in a Kendra. So Saturn is the strongest planet. Oh, actually, 10th Lord in 10th, so Chaturasita Samadasya apply. So we use Chaturasita Samadasya for US. So if you look at the dashas, so right now Jupiter Mahadasya is running, and Jupiter is the 9th Lord in the 10th house. So 9th Lord shows principles, righteousness, etc. But he's in debility, so basically compromising some ideals and pragmatic governance. But this is a decent period as far as the Rasi chart is concerned. In the Navamsa chart, Jupiter is the 8th and 11th Lord in the 11th house. So it shows 8th Lord shows a lot of ups and downs. So in terms of foreign policy, US will have a lot of ups and downs during this period, and but he's in the 11th house, so overall things will be stable, should be stable during this period. But Venus period is an interesting period. Venus is the Lagna Lord in the 7th house, so this is a period of good relations with the other countries. So my expectation is during the current period, in the next year and a half or in the next couple of years, US foreign policy will have a lot of ups and downs. US will be figuring out how it should engage in the world, because Joe Biden has gotten out of Afghanistan. People may think that he is also like Trump, who wants America first and wants to not get involved in other countries like Trump wanted. But I don't expect that to be the case from Biden's chart as well as his Swearing-in chart. He will get involved in other countries, but it'll be very picky. He will choose which countries he will get involved in. If he thinks that Afghanistan doesn't have any strategic interest, he won't get involved. But I do expect some US to be involved in some wars. And in the case of Jupiter, because he's taking part in Guru Chandala Yoga, and he's the eighth lord. It's possible based on the Navamsa, but let us look at the Rudramsa chart. See, he's the Jupiter is the eighth lord in the Rudramsa chart. I'm looking for the longitudes. -11 degree Taurus. Okay. Yeah. So he is in the fifth house. So Jupiter is the eighth lord of instability, and he is in the fifth house of emotions. So he doesn't specifically show any major wars, etc. in Jupiter period, but he shows instability basically when it comes to engaging with other countries. So this is an unstable period, but if we look at the Venus period, let's see Rudramsya. Again, Venus period also doesn't really show any wars, and Saturn also doesn't. But if you look at Sun, Sun is the fourth lord debilitated in the sixth house in Rudramsha chart. So this Sun period is a problematic period. So, but the thing is, in the Navamsa chart, he is well placed in the second house with the with Mercury. Fourth and fifth lords are together. That's a Raj Yoga. So, what we can expect from that is in the 2029 March to 2032 January time frame, US may be involved in a war, and there may be some international consensus or collaboration around US. So US will be part of a coalition that is strong. So it will be involved in a war, but it may not be disastrous for US. That's basically what we can tell based on all the conditions. So overall, my expectation is US, after getting out of Afghanistan, it may get in somewhere else, it may get out of some places, get in some places. So there will be a lot of instability, and also China will be very aggressive during the next decade. So US will play its cards very carefully, and it will seem like US has an inconsistent foreign policy over the decade. But towards the end of the decade, things will line up. China will become really weak, but a weakening China will start major wars, and US will form a coalition that will be strong. So that is my overall expectation. So these are some of the impacts on various countries. So by the way, we haven't looked at Pakistan, another major player in that neighborhood. Islamabad, Pakistan. If we make the same 20-year chart for Pakistan, see Navamsa chart. What did I do? I pressed twice. Sorry, then it went to 2000 chart. Okay. So let's see what is the best dasha here. 25 Leo 40. Saturn is strong, but Chaturasi Samadasa doesn't. We don't care. Ketu is strong. Most likely Vimshoti Dasa based on Ketu. Tara Dasa based on Ketu, most likely. I don't see any other Dasa that is applicable here. So let us look at I think the same as India. So it is basically the same as India, but let us see a few things here. Now, if you look at the Saturn period, actually let's also look at Timsamsa first, because that will be an interesting chart for in the case of Pakistan. So if you see the Jupiter period, Jupiter is the Lagna Lord in Manakarkasthana. Lagna Lord in Manakarkasthana is never really good. Lagna Lord in Kandanta or Manakarkasthana is not good. And then Saturn period will come. Saturn is the second and third Lord in the third house. So these two periods are really problematic periods. There will be a lot of internal troubles within Pakistan. So that is why I expect that as a result of the rising Taliban in Afghanistan, that will backfire on Pakistan towards the middle and end of this decade. And as there is fight within Afghanistan between Taliban and other forces, other anti-Taliban forces. Some of those forces may infiltrate Pakistan, come back to Pakistan, and their religious fanaticism may be used against the Pakistan state and Pakistan army. So this period is a period. These two periods are very problematic periods, and if you look at the Rudramsha chart, okay, if we see the Rudramsha chart again, Jupiter is the seventh lord, and Saturn is the sixth lord. So particularly Saturn period is a very problematic period. There can be a Jupiter and Saturn being the seventh and sixth lords together in Lagna. During their periods, there can be wars. And in India's case, we saw the possibility of a war in the second half of 2023 before the elections or beginning of 2024. So it is possible that there may be some engagement between some small war between India and Pakistan in 2023 August to 2024 May time period. And if you look at the Navamsa chart, Saturn, Jupiter. If you look at Mercury period, Mercury is the 8th and 11th lord in the 8th house, and even though he is with Sun, that's not a good combination anymore. That's a Duryoga. So during this period, Pakistan's international support will weaken. Basically, in the Navamsa chart, bad planets, their dashas will result in foreign policy problems. So during this period, there is a chance that Pakistan will become isolated on the world stage. So these are some of the logic I used in drawing some of the conclusions I mentioned. But because I mentioned so many conclusions, it is difficult to show everything. So I tried to cover some of those, and it's already pretty long. So I will stop here. Again, overall, the next decade will be an unstable decade. So things will keep piling. Once we had the pandemic, and now the instability in Afghanistan and its impact on its surrounding countries as well as on Europe. So these instabilities will keep piling up over the decade, culminating in a major war at the end of this decade. So what I recommend, like I always do, is we can't really do much. We can't control much. So do what you can do and control what you can control, and the rest leave to God, and have confidence that it will all end in good in the long run. Even though there may be suffering in the short term, in the long term, this will result in a more sustainable peace, more sustainable and more just peace in the world. So just try to surrender to God and spend time thinking of God and doing what is in your hands. On that note, I will end. Thank you very much. Thank you for watching this. Om Tat Sat. Sarvam Shri Krishnarpanamastu. Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. Sarve Jana Sukhino Bhavantu. Yavat Bhumandale Sanatana Dharmo Vardhatu. Visheshatah Bhartakhande Amerika Varshe Tibet Rashtre Cha. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.